Lean startup is everywhere. Most of the popular literature on innovation management talks about implementing this methodology, whether you're a startup or a well-established company, with some tweaks for context. And honestly, I talk about it too. I mention it, I reference it, I've recommended it. But lately, that's exactly what made me stop and think and ask some questions about efficiency. And that's where the real problem with lean startup is. This methodology has spread faster than any validation of it. It's been overapplied, overhyped, and recommended so broadly that we've stopped asking whether it actually works, whether it's really effective as the proponents sell it. So today, I want to make a case against lean startup. Let's talk about structural flaws of the methodology, even in the cases it was designed for. We'll look at specific industries where lean startup simply doesn't hold up. And yes, I'll also mention some narrow cases where it actually makes sense to implement it. Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. My name is Lisa. For over 5 years, I've been designing and running collaborative innovation projects, collaborative university competitions, open innovation programs, and R&D partnerships for some of the world's leading companies. Now I run disruptive and open innovation consultancy, and this channel is where I share my experience. If you work in innovation management, R&D, or you run a business that you want to grow, this is for you. We cover open innovation models, facilitation, collaboration strategies, and the broader questions about how innovation actually works. Now, let me start with reminding what Lean Startup is about. And if you've heard enough about it, feel free to go to the next section. But Lean Startup is a methodology created by Eric Rice, and it was introduced in his 2011 book, The Lean Startup. This methodology was built on earlier thinking from Steve Blank on customer development and borrowed principles from lean manufacturing. The core idea of this framework is to give startups an opportunity to launch more safely. So instead of spending years and millions of dollars on developing a final product based on just your assumptions, you test your hypothesis about the product as quickly and as cheaply as possible before investing significant resources. Basically, you build a minimum viable product, an MVP, the simplest version of your product that lets you test a core hypothesis. So you build an MVP, then you put it in front of real customers, you measure their response, and you use learning to either pivot, basically change the direction of your product, test another hypothesis, or scale if the feedback from your customers is positive. So the central loop is the following: you build, you measure, and you learn. And then you repeat if needed. Initially, this methodology was mostly oriented towards software companies, software startups. Its author, Eric Rice, was fairly explicit that he was writing primarily about software startups. And yes, startups, not well-established companies. But then the method gained huge popularity and experts started to look for ways how to implement it into other areas, other companies for general innovation management, for established companies with successful products, for manufacturing industries, deep tech, industries that rely on scientific R&D. Now let's see what lean startup advocates promise us. So according to Eric Rice, startup success can be engineered, and propagators of the lean startup say that innovation success can be engineered if you follow a certain process. Then proponents of this method often mention that it is a universal approach that can be applied to any industry. They emphasize customer feedback over intuition. They mention that customers know better than the company's founders and its teams. They also focus on quick MVPs that are supposed to kind of de-risk innovation, because with the lean startup, you don't scale your product from the very beginning, so you don't need to invest a big amount of money, time, and other resources. You just invest a small portion in MVP before making a decision to scale. So you basically solve the problem of investing tons of resources into a product that initially might have no chance to gain success due to wrong assumptions about the customer's needs, what is important for them, design of the product, etc., etc. And that makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, logically, if you can validate your hypothesis without big investments of resources, why not do it? Unfortunately, innovation and business in general is not that simple. So let's see if the lean startup methodology can actually fulfill its promises. If you look for any real evidence of efficiency of this methodology, you'll discover that it's not that easy to find it. You will see lots of positive reviews from some managers praising this methodology that allow them to increase their revenues, but it's very difficult to find any real numbers, like how these newly developed products increase their revenues, like in real life, increase their market share, or how even the success rate of their R&D projects improved. Especially if you're looking for evidence from a number of companies, not just separate cases. So despite lean startups' popularity, because this method is taught at hundreds of universities worldwide, it's endorsed by companies like Procter & Gamble, Intuit, Dropbox, and it's foundational to a National Science Foundation program, quantitative research on whether it's actually effective is quite scarce, which is really strange, keeping in mind this methodology has been popular for over a decade. And if you look at different academic reviews on the lean startup methodology, you'll see that the authors of those often highlight a lack of quantitative papers and empirical validation of the method. That means it's difficult to find proofs in scale of how much this methodology influences revenues, project survival rates. It's really difficult to compare numbers within companies that use the startup methodology and those that don't use it. Of course, you will see some papers that highlight linkage between startup performance and the lean startup methodology in general, or at least some steps of it. For example, according to Leatherby and Katila, who conducted a study of 152 NSF, National Science Foundation, supported lean startup teams, more engagement with the method relates to higher performance of the firm in the 18th month period following the lean startup intervention. Harms and Schwery in their paper identified a moderately strong, positive, and significant relationship between lean startup capability and performance of the company. However, I should mention that they were doing their research based on software startups based in Berlin, whose customers were culturally and geographically proximate. And my main problem with these papers is that the word performance there is not specifically defined. It's not about specific metrics like growth and revenue. In the first paper, for example, we're talking about early stage venture progress, like the startup hasn't died and it's good enough. For the second paper, performance is basically about subjective success, the way startups' respondents defined it for themselves. So that's quite a vague definition of performance. At the same time, Latt, Lutonen, and Jamel have a very different outcome. They did their research based on data from clean tech teams. The researchers identified that while customer interaction conducted by itself increases venture performance, experimentation has no significant direct effect on venture performance. Moreover, when both experimentation and customer interaction are conducted together, experimentation weakens the positive impact of customer interaction. Not quite what the Lean Startup framework promises. So yeah, basically their research says that interacting with your customers is good, but experimenting with your product, with your MVP, doesn't really have benefits for your startup. There is another interesting thing. The Lean Startup became popular around 2011, 2012, so we have over a decade of ventures using this method. The survival rate for new establishments hasn't changed compared to what it was before spreading the Lean Startup methodology. And US Bureau of Labor Statistics data supports this. And of course, one could say that many startups use it wrong or don't use it rigorously enough, but taking into account how widespread the methodology is, we should see at least some impact in aggregated data, at least something, but we don't see it. And yes, I'm specifically looking for these big studies with a large number of companies, because otherwise we cannot really prove that this method works the way it is promoted. We cannot say, oh, it's an outstanding method that will make your company succeed, your innovation ventures will be profitable, you are de-risking your innovation with it, based on a number of the most prominent successful examples. We all heard this story about the planes coming back from war battles. We should not focus on a few successful cases and look for ways to improve them, but we should focus on cases where the methodology failed. And I don't really have trouble with the Lean methodology per se. I have trouble with people who sell this methodology as the ultimate one for innovation management. In my opinion, it's not the case. And it's not only because there is not enough evidence that this methodology gives great results. It's not only about hearing positive examples and ignoring failures. It's not even that I don't believe in a magic pill for innovation, because I don't believe in it. It's the fact that there are many very real cases when the Lean framework doesn't fit, it doesn't work, and it can actually harm your project, impede your innovation progress. So before you implement any framework, think, analyze whether it actually fits your context, whether it fits your specific project. Because innovation is risky regardless of what method you use. No process can eliminate that, and the Lean Startup cannot eliminate that too. Now let me talk about where specifically Lean Startup fails, when it might be not the best idea to use this methodology, where the promises of its advocates break. And I'm going to start with the biggest case here, and the biggest case against this methodology is radical and disruptive innovation. And this point is actually applicable to the main case the Lean Startup methodology was designed for. It is also applicable for the software industry, for software startups. That's where the method just fails to deliver. And actually, it is quite a well-known point from critics of the Lean Startup method. It doesn't work when you want to create something more than an incremental improvement. The reason why it doesn't work is because when you conduct your Lean processes, you talk to your customers today and you deal with their today's pains and problems, something that they can actually give you information about because they are aware of it. But you cannot ask them about what they need tomorrow because they don't know. They've got no idea about the future. And they don't know the needs they might have tomorrow. Like, have you ever thought that you'd need a mobile phone like 25 years ago? None of us have probably thought of it until mobile phones became ubiquitous. And as one of the main critics of Lean Startup, Thalin, Gambardella, Stern, and Zenger point out, the lean startup method is based on principles of lean manufacturing that Toyota implemented for their existing products manufacturing in order to incrementally improve them. The lean method was not created for building radical innovation. And the problem with customer feedback isn't only about hindering radical innovation. In general, customers don't always know what they want, even if it's connected to their present needs and pains. There is quite a big piece of literature that shows how feedback from customers can mislead entrepreneurs, lead them to the wrong conclusions and lessons. So building your innovation based on what customers tell you can lead you in the wrong direction, and you just might end up being behind the companies that took a bigger risk, introduced something people never expected and couldn't imagine, but all of a sudden wanted. And it's not always the case that you actually need customer confirmation. Because I was once working on a project connected to warming up the cold chain. Basically, the problem was to find a solution that would allow increasing the temperature of refrigerators for consumer products. Increasing the temperature means your electric bills go down. You don't need to pay as much for cooling. Now, do you really need to confirm this need with your customers? I don't think so. It's pretty clear that any company would love to pay less for electricity. Sometimes the solution is clearly solving one of your customers' needs. You don't need their approval, just go ahead and implement it. Why would you waste your time on experiments and loops while your competitor might be taking a lead and just giving customers what they want? The next point is connected to the fact that the lean startup doesn't feed all industries. As I've mentioned before, initially the lean startup method was focused on the software startups, not deep tech, not materials, not consumer products. And it works best for software companies. The benefits their products provide are not always obvious to customers, so you really need to see whether they're going to use it. Also, it's easier to quickly create a minimum viable product. It's easier to gather information on what customers think about it. And software products are really more about incremental innovation in general, so it makes a lot of sense. But think about other industries where we have different processes, where we need to invest much more into creating a prototype. It might not be feasible to do that. You might end up wasting tons of money just to develop a very basic version of your product, when it would be much more reasonable to, and even critical sometimes, to focus on creating a good quality final product. Think about planes. Could you imagine Boeing presenting a minimum viable prototype of their new plane? That sounds ridiculous to me. And as we're talking about how impossible it is to build a quick and simple MVP for Boeing, I'd like to mention the next point. Creating simplified MVPs as quickly as possible might not be the best idea in general. Last week, I saw a post on LinkedIn from a software startup founder who was talking about her failed company. And she mentioned not focusing on building a robust, complete, and high-quality product from the very beginning as one of the reasons of their failure. And this is exactly the kind of case lean startup proponents don't always talk about. Because even in software, the one industry this methodology was built for, the MVP-first approach isn't always the right one. Sometimes without an initial solid foundation for the product that takes time and care and effort to assemble, your company doesn't even stand a chance. Sometimes deliver a low-quality prototype and you risk destroying the trust of your audience you may never recover. So sometimes you must focus on building a good product instead of going for a quick and simple MVP even in software. The next point is connected to the fact that the lean startup is basically product customer focused, but not all innovation is. Not all innovation is about creating new products or business models. Some of them are connected to just a part of those products, like materials used. Some of them are connected to processes, like manufacturing processes. In that case, you are the customer. Some innovations are about your organization in general. Some of them could be driven by upcoming regulations. In those types of innovation, you could be the customer, or the customer might have no say at all. You cannot ignore these types of innovation. You cannot just say, oh yeah, we're not going to do that because we are working according to the lean startup methodology and we need to talk to our customers. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Now, getting back to my example with the cold chain challenge, it was basically about improving a part of the existing product, but the end customer wouldn't have noticed anything significant with a new product. So there was just no point to even discuss it with them. Another point that I want to raise is connected to the fact that the lean startup doesn't really match the technology adoption lifecycle theory. According to the Jeffrey Moore's theory of technology adoption lifecycle, he described in his book Crossing the Chasm, there are different types of consumers depending on the stage of technology adoption, of how ready they are to adopt a new technology. Some of them, like innovators, are ready to accept whatever new thing you introduce to them, and some, like early or late majority, won't accept a novel solution until it is proven and until you conduct certain efforts to make other groups successfully adopt it, and only then these groups, which consist basically, yes, they are the majority of all customers, only then they would see, oh yeah, like other groups adopted it and we're ready to adopt it too. And the lean startup method doesn't really take this into account. It just says like you should go and talk to your customers. So if you gather your customer feedback on your new product, how do you know which group of customers you're talking to? So how do you know, like getting back to the point, how do you know your customers provide relevant feedback for your specific case? And the last point that I want to make is connected to the fact that flexibility and serendipity matter for innovation. In one of my previous videos, I talk about the importance of breaking the rules in innovation processes. It's not always linear. Your innovation process should not be rigid. At the end of the day, you're creating something entirely new. So you need a certain extent of freedom and rebelliousness to build something that wasn't built before. If you follow the lean startup methodology too rigidly, you have no room for unexpected discoveries and important process deviations. And some of the most important innovations in history came from exactly those absolutely unplanned moments. So what do we have with regard to promises of the lean startup proponents? Engineerable success. Well, there is the lack of quantitative evidence, and the failure rate of startups, even startups, hasn't changed despite the prevalence of this methodology. Universal applicability. As I have mentioned before, you cannot use it for all cases, as it doesn't work for radical and disruptive innovation, as well as it doesn't work for some industries, and yeah, even certain cases within the software industry. Then customer feedback beats intuition. This promise is contradicted by the chasm problem and the critique about customer imagination limits. MVP de-risks innovation. It is contradicted by industries where building an MVP is technically impossible or meaningless, like deep tech, pharma, material science, etc. So when do you actually use lean startup? First of all, it does really make sense to use it in cases when you're focused on incremental innovation, when creating and testing a prototype doesn't cost a lot, when you can more or less easily get feedback from your customers, when your market is uncertain but the technology is more or less known, so it's not something completely new for your customers. So yes, the software industry is exactly the right case for the lean startup methodology, but even then you should be really careful with your case, because sometimes even within the software industry, as I have mentioned before, you might need a really robust product from the very beginning, with a really good foundation, and you cannot afford building something very simple, something of not very good quality. Sometimes you really need to focus on delivering a high quality final product for your customers. And for other industries, there are some methodologies that could work better. I should probably make separate videos about them because obviously each of them has its pros and cons, but I'll briefly mention a couple of examples now. A stage gate process, when a project moves through various stages like research, development, testing, and launch. Before each stage, managers, decision makers evaluate a project and make a decision whether this project is moving further, it should be paused, reworked, or completely stopped. This process is usually used by industries like consumer goods, chemicals, pharmaceuticals, and other manufacturing industries in general. It's not ideal, but as an alternative, it might work. There is also the DARPA style milestone-based funding process, which is created for really ambitious, radical projects for developing high-risk, high-reward technologies. Projects like this, they usually last from 3 to 5 years, during which they have to achieve a certain milestone. And if the milestone is achieved, the decision to move the project ahead to the next stage is made, and the project gets another investment tranche. There is also a design-driven innovation, which is almost the total opposite to the lean startup methodology, because according to design-driven innovation, the radical innovations don't come from listening to what customers want. And while its author, Roberto Verganti, is really right, you shouldn't listen to your customers if you want to develop a radical innovation. Verganti argues that such innovations come from reinterpreting the meaning of a product. Again, just some examples, we really need to dive deeper into them. And in general, is there any way to de-risk your innovation process? Is there any way that you can just follow and get a 100% successful result for your innovation or your startup? No, it does not exist. Whatever methodologies, whatever ways of innovation we're using, it will never give us a 100% guarantee of the positive result. Never, 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 it's not going to happen. Innovation is an inherently risky activity. And the higher the risk, usually, the higher the reward. We just have to accept it, but I actually love it about innovation. So I hope this video was useful for you, and I hope that whatever process, whatever methodology for your innovation management you're going to use, I just hope that all your projects are successful. Of course, that's not going to happen, but we can still hope, right? And I really wish you good luck with all your innovation activities, with all your innovation projects. If you have any comments about the video, about the Lean Startup method, about how it helped you, or maybe how it failed you, or maybe if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below, or just text me on LinkedIn. You will find the link in the description under the video. I hope to see you next time with the next video, and I wish you a very good day. Bye!